Hi, welcome to this discussion. Today I have Nitish and Pradeep, AI leaders from Persistent Systems, and we will be talking about some of the development in the industry. So Nitish, last week one of the frontier model company, they have released a feature, and I remember that in March timeframe when we were talking about 4.0, we also have talked about similar features in SASVA 4.0. So how do you take some of these developments? What is your reaction to this?
Yeah, I mean the news came as a little surprise. Uh, there's a big resemblance to everything we talked in 4.0. But then see, we are in a field where even though you protect your IP, there are things that can always look similar. Maybe they were using some other technique. Maybe during the announcement we thought that maybe the approach is slightly different. They were tackling this similar problem. The first news was at a very high level. So we waited for a couple of days. It was about understanding the extent that they have gone. So for that company, it was all about developer world. It was designed to solve developer, desk challenges. Accelerating product development, everything that they were doing. Their models are great. The coding platform that you talked about, the news came as a surprise, obviously, but then we are in a competitive field. For first couple of days when Pradeep and I were talking, we were we were looking at similarity. It was a little disappointing that it looked like a completely rip-off initially. And Pradeep can explain a little more about the type of things that we saw similar. Now, where it got interesting is when we looked at their actual product, when we looked at demos, when we looked at their product documentation, and we realized that it is not just about the resemblance on the use case. It is frame by frame, approach was very similar. You will hear from Pradeep. And more importantly, we saw something which caught our attention. We left a particular limitation in our product because we were also doing the limited release to our customers. It was token intensive. For us, it was important that we put some restriction about how many concurrent agents run. There was no real reason about why we put that. We just for our own scale balance, we decided that we will put a limit to number of concurrent subagents that comes up. It was not a real limitation. What these guys have done is, if you look at their press release, uh, not only that the approach is similar, but then they also talked about that limitation, which caught our attention. So, I mean, disappointing. Disappointing because almost $1 trillion in valuation. For us, this is something we released in December as a pre view to our customers. We went out in February, March. We did our main general availability in April. It's been 3 months. We are getting amazing momentum. This is something which we thought is completely different than what commodity platforms are using today. We were completely different in our approach, and now you have a premier, AI company almost replicating your work. But again, we are in this field. It doesn't matter. We have to get used to it. Problem is somewhat different, and I'll come to that magnitude of the real problem, which is not about what work they have lifted or basically replicated. The problem is in a different magnitude, and we should understand it a little better. But let's first understand from Pradeep the type of things where what approach we were taking and what type of similarities they have introduced. That would give you a sense about how close it is actually.
Yeah, so see, if I discuss this in terms of examples rather than getting into too much of details. Uh, See, as you know, our journey always has been about solving enterprise problems in enterprise setting, which is basically complex problem, and that follows a very specific path. First of all, which is not something that you can fix in one iteration. It takes multiple iterations. So it has always been our approach, whether it is complex migration or solving a complex, adding a complex feature in an enterprise setting. It is always about taking small steps in the right direction, and that's how we have always designed. And we found that it's a very similar approach that has been taken here. Similarly, in our approach, there was another case where we always used to say that when we are in enterprise world, we are most worried about quality. And just because you are using AI doesn't mean that your quality should drop. It has to be accelerated development with the same quality. And so you should not be worried about budgets and tokens at the expense of quality. So we see lots of striking resemblance. These are just some examples that I took, which is very unfortunate, I would say, to the least.
And what is more interesting actually, and sorry I stepped in, interesting stuff is not about the approach that they have taken forward. It is the direction. A company that, right from day one, it's been almost a year and a half for them to be in the field, and they are talking specific about a way of working. The ways of working for this company over last year or so has been about create a plan, have developer in control, bring some resources together. For them to move away from that direction, a large ship, it's very difficult for them to change a direction, right? Unless they see something fundamentally different, a big change, risk outside. We have always been in this lane.
Yeah, in fact, even though we released few months back, but we have been talking about these dynamic agents and dynamic workflows, I think for last 1.5, 2 years.
Oh yeah, the first dynamic agent, look at our first patent 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, was about dynamic agents. That we went out and said that, well, you can't have static agents where you have a developer agent, you have some MD files. We never believed in that world. Our world was always about dynamic agents looking at intent, coming together and solving a problem. So it's not resemblance. What is also interesting here is, if Pradeep, you can explain, there are two possibilities. One, they looked at your design and said this is a way to go, and they decided to go that route, which means they are gaining inspiration from your work, which is good. It is good because I take example of cars. If someone comes with SUV, everyone has SUV, right? So it's not really, they didn't steal your IP. They get inspired with your work, right? Versus if you start noticing things that you had in your code, which is exactly as the same limitation in their world, then there is something bigger. You talked about dynamic agents, you talked about the phased approach, they are also calling it round now. We introduced 3 things. We introduced the concept of how mini sprints will be done, dynamic agents, humans, gates. We talked about how strategy can be created, right? They do have some problem, by the way. Their strategy, the way they create strategy, change memory, context and all, because fundamentally they are using a different science. They get limited by that science. But the approach, limitations, strategy and change of direction is definitely alarming. We believe this is something which should be put up in a public domain, because people should be concerned about it. If someone is looking at your code, someone has access to everything. On day one, we talked about data security, privacy and all. These big guys will always come and say that, well, we are not training our model. They don't have to train model because they are training their engine around it, right? Very soon they are building their own consulting company, right? For you to expose your code, etc., you have to be very, very careful about how they are being used. And I think at some stage there should be a question to these companies as how you are looking at our data. It's not about model transient memory. It is more about where is my code going? How are you reading my code? Where is that boundary coming in? If I engage a partner today, there is a level of trust I have with him that if I give my code, is not going to create a replica of the product, right? Here we see that type of pattern where we are concerned.
So that's very insightful. So now as the industry is becoming much more comfortable using a lot of these frontier models, so what is the message to them in terms of how to leverage the positive side of it, but at the same time be careful?
Yeah, I don't think it is about IP violation or anything. If I build something, you like it, you can create a similar thing. It's absolutely okay. You can buy my product, you can read from my product and you can build. We learn like that, right? I have seen someone building, we take inspiration from the world. Let this world open up. There's no problem. The problem is they are not just about model, they are also about products. Tomorrow they can launch a cybersecurity company because they know everything about all cybersecurity companies. To me, this is a problem. And for us, when we talk about, my data being used for training, I don't think it is about training. It is much, much more than that. And I'll, summarize my point in a very simple way. I have agents. My agents looks at market signals. They look at different events that are happening around. It looks at my preferences, my work that I am doing, prioritize the task, put some efforts. At the end of the day, when I get into my system, I get a curated list of things that I should be concerned about. So it looked at 10,000 of these noise, and it gave me 3 things to look at. We believe that these company will probably have something similar, right? It can do analysis and give it to their bigger team, and their bigger team can actually start working on it. To me, that is a risk that I'm trying to highlight. But I don't think, we should get bogged by the whole concept. I think it is an open world. If I build something, you guys like that work, you can replicate, we can replicate. That's how the whole economy has built up all these years. I'm only trying to raise an awareness that people who use these platforms, you should know that this is all happening to you. I think for us, this was that moment where we thought we should come out in the public and we should talk about it.
So yeah, that's very insightful, and thanks Nitish and Pradeep for sharing this insight. I'm sure that as we are progressing in our journey to use AI effectively, it is equally important to use AI responsibly as well. So I'm sure that all of you would have gained some understanding about this. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.